Good evening. The government has promised to carry out a radical review of business rates in England. But with the current much criticised system having been in place for 27 years and an expectation that any shake-up will be fiscally neutral, is it too little too late? Well, as if to emphasise the pressure that many small businesses are under, it was also revealed today that nearly 6,000 high street shops were forced to shut last year. That's 3 times the 2013 figure. Business rates are charged to 1.8 million shops, offices and pubs and are based on the value of the rental paid by the retailer. Current valuations are still based on property prices in 2008, before the economic downturn hit the value of commercial real estate. The rates paid by English businesses are the highest of any European Union country and can be a company's biggest expense after wages and rent.
We want to have a wide-ranging discussion about do we need to reform the way business rates works? How to reform it? Does it need a different tax base? And, you know, for small businesses especially, the retail environment has changed a lot in the last 30 years since business rates was first invented. There's more competition online, for example. But also we've seen through the recent economic difficulties that the business rate system has not responded to the economic cycle. Actually, in some cases, it's made it worse.
The Chief Secretary of Treasury talks about a radical review, and that is exactly what is needed. This tax was originally created hundreds of years ago, and in its current form over 25 years ago, and it's one that has become out of date, outmoded, in that it is, particularly in a high street sense, acting as a disincentive for retailers to actually open stores in local communities, and every one of those empty shops around the country is roughly about 10 jobs in the local economy.
Well, Melanie Leech is Chief Executive of the British Property Federation, joins me now. Melanie, what's wrong with the current system?
Good evening. Well, it's great to hear the Chief Secretary today in his announcement confirming all the arguments we've made consistently and loudly and strongly over the last year why a fundamental reform of business rates is necessary. And what we want to see come out of that review is a system that's fair, that acts as an encouragement to investment in our towns and cities, that's based on up-to-date valuations, and that fundamentally makes us able to invest, makes high streets, properties up and down the country vibrant and alive again. And we don't think the current system does any of those things.
Now, Danny Alexander, when he made his announcement today, he said it's not really very clear what the alternative is. Do you have an alternative in mind?
Well, we think there are a number of things that can be looked at. We've not argued for a move away from a property-based tax. The government's made it pretty clear it wants to stay with that model. And we do accept that it might be hard to reach consensus about a radical review that moves away from that fundamental basis. But nevertheless, we think there are many, many ways in which the system can be made fairer and more effective. It has to be a system that responds to the wider economic market conditions. So, for example, at the moment, the tax take goes up year on year, despite the fact that, as the Chief Secretary said, we can be facing economic, severely difficult times during that same period. And for individual businesses, you're going to be taxed whether or not you have an income. And there's no other tax, I think, which operates in that particular way. So that would be a good place to start. Let's tax people when they can afford to pay, and let's give them relief when they're struggling to keep their businesses on track to drive investment. Let's help them to get back on track.
Of course, the thing is, though, if it's going to be fiscally neutral, I mean, for example, the CBI wants to lift a lot of really small businesses out of paying business rates altogether. Presumably that means the pain gets spread around and intensified elsewhere in the system.
Yeah. Well, we certainly do think there's a case for looking at whether or not it's ever going to be efficient to collect tax from smaller businesses. So we would support the idea that you look very fundamentally at whether or not small businesses should be in the net at all. But on top of that, we think that fiscally neutral means to be looked at over the whole of the economic cycle. So year on year, we don't think that's the right way to approach it. We have to accept that in good times the tax rate may go up from where it is now, but in downturn times it may be less. So you need to look at it over the whole of the economic cycle. And then we think that if you get that right, you encourage investment, and overall you'll bring more people into the system because we'll have more successful businesses able to contribute. So that will actually be a positive.
Now, one of the things that you've called for in the BPF is for more regular re-evaluations. But isn't that going to be incredibly bureaucratic and time-consuming?
Well, that's one of the things the review needs to look at, but we don't accept that that needs to be the case. Actually, if you look overseas, and I think the review said that it will look at good practice around the world, somewhere like the Netherlands, where they've moved to an annual valuation system, actually the costs have gone down by over 25%, so there's no need why it should be more expensive. In fact, we could end up saving money.
And you could link it into GDP, for example, which is one of the suggestions that's kicking around.
Yes, there are lots of different suggestions and ways in which we can make this tax work more efficiently and encourage incentivise investment rather than act as a penalty on businesses that are failing.
Yeah, now a lot of the retailers are very much up in arms over the fact that online retailers sort of seem to get away with this, so obviously they will pay business rates on their warehouses and so forth. But are you attracted by this idea of applying business rates to individual click and collect lockers, for example? I mean, that's one suggestion I've seen.
Well, we think it's a bit of a false debate, actually. I've come from an event at the Houses of Parliament this afternoon, listening to one very major retailer when he was asked whether he's a bricks and mortar retailer or an online retailer. The answer is he's both, and increasingly retailers are omni-channel. So I think this sort of split between high street retailers and online retailers is a bit of a false dichotomy. Increasingly, people have to be all of those things. So I think it's not it's a false debate, I think.
OK, Melanie Leech, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.